In 2011, Supergiant Games threw their hat into the growing indie games ring with a post-apocalyptic action RPG called Bastion. It was a fun and very well-received game that I had given a shot and enjoyed quite a bit. So when I learned that Transistor would be their second offering, my interest peaked immediately. Transistor is set in a futuristic sci-fi world called Cloudbank, where everything is controlled by the people. You play as Red, a singer who has had her voice stolen as a result of an assassination attempt. A group called the Camerata had attempted to use the Transistor to kill Red, but they failed thanks to the courage of an unknown man. Throughout the rest of the game, you travel with the Transistor in an attempt to get away from your attackers and save Cloudbank from the ever-growing threat of the Process, a computer-like system that seems to have gone out of control. And that's the game in a nutshell. Go around with the Transistor, defeating the Process and unlocking new abilities for the Transistor as you go. But the Transistor is more than just a giant sword that Red can barely carry. It's a device the Camerata has used to trap the consciousness of people that they felt would be useful to their cause. This includes the man that saved Red's life, who acts as the narrator for the game and the voice for the Transistor. For me, that's part of what sets this game apart. Everything seems to have some sort of story or personality attached to it. The Transistor itself has a voice. Every function that you unlock for the Transistor has a consciousness that was taken by the Camerata attached to it. Even the robotic enemies of the game have a sort of personality to them. You oftentimes see snapshots just taking random pictures of Red's posters, or cluckers just doing clucker things. I really don't know what's up with those enemies. The gameplay is framed from an isometric perspective, with hand-drawn art for the background. And let me just say that the game is beautiful. The backgrounds are lush and colorful, the designs of the computerized cityscape are intriguing, and the character and enemy designs are entrancing. But the perspective oftentimes gets in the way of the gameplay. There were several times where I lost myself in the heat of a battle or got blindsided from behind the foreground scenery. Then there's the gameplay itself. Early on, you realize that this game is not going to hold your hand. If you want to learn how to play this game, you need to explore the game and test the gameplay elements out by yourself. There are only a few instances where I can think of the game stopping my progress and opening a dialogue box trying to explain the gameplay to me. And the lack of hand-holding never gets in the way of your enjoyment. The beginning of the game is never too difficult, which allows you to get a handle on the gameplay elements fairly easily. The combat system is the game's main feature. At the game's core, Transistor is an action game. As you venture through the city, you'll come across battlefields of enemies, with barriers that you cannot escape and obstacles that can grant both you and your enemies cover. The game forces you to make very good use of the battlefield and be aware of your surroundings, because the enemies will be relentless in their pursuit of you. At specific terminals, you're able to equip up to 4 of the Transistor's functions as your primary functions. Each of these functions can do different amounts of damage or maybe have different effects on yourself or the enemies. You can also equip functions as upgrades to your attacks to give them an extra effect or a perk. But then on top of that, you can also equip your functions as passive abilities that further help your cause. Some functions will be more useful than others as attacks, and some will be extremely useful as upgrades. Experimenting with the functions is the most fun part of the game. Finding the best combinations always gives you great satisfaction because you were the one that experimented. You were the one that figured out what works together best. Part of the combat is using these moves to move around and defeat the Process, but there will be times where you'll be overwhelmed and need a plan of attack. This is where the turn function comes in. The turn function allows you to stop time and use the Transistor to plan out an attack with a limited amount of movement and time available. Once the attack is planned out, Red will move across the battlefield at super speed, performing the move. However, once turn is over, you are completely vulnerable while the turn function recharges. Most of, if not all of your functions will be unusable, and if you are defeated during the recharge phase, one of your equipped primary functions will be lost and unequipable for a while. And trust me when I say, you will lose several functions throughout the playthrough, especially if you decide like I did to use the limiters to further ratchet up the difficulty. This gives a great sense of balance to the game. You can't just go around using turn all the time. Once you've used turn, you're pretty much relegated to running away from the Process. As you go through the game, it's not just Red that gets extra functions, but also the enemies. Sometimes in pretty broken ways.
Why does the area of effect enemy get a grapple beam?
The difficulty curve of the game never feels off balance, and the extra power boost that the enemies receive shows you just how much better both you and Red have become as fighters. Now, I cannot finish this review without talking about what may be the best part of the game, the music, which kind of makes sense, you know, because you play as a singer. The soundtrack is a fantastic mix of jazz and electronic music that is able to both capture the mood of the different settings and also be just flat out amazing. The main theme is an especially badass tune that I could not get out of my head for weeks later. The game can easily be beaten in one sitting as the story only lasts about 4 to 5 hours, but the gameplay can be extended from backdoor challenge rooms to the New Game Plus like recursion mode. Story-wise, the game doesn't answer all the questions it raises, like what exactly is the transistor and what exactly the process was. But those unanswered questions gives the game an open-endedness that allows you to fill in the blanks yourself. The game's ending also left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, but that's just my own opinion. You may find the game's ending to be a perfect way to finish. Overall, I found the game to be very enjoyable, and it might be one of my favorite games I've played so far in 2014. The game is currently $20 on both Steam and PS4, so I would encourage you to pick up the game and give it a shot. I don't think you'll leave disappointed.